Ladies and gentlemen, here we are again, back for another session of the Air Cargo Handling Logistics digital events. And the session we've got now ready to roll out is industry collaboration. And I've got four figureheads here who love that word collaboration. So looking to get a real insight into how the supply chain togetherness is really, really living and breathing. So the people I'm talking about, the four guests, are firstly Brendan Sullivan, recently appointed Global Head Cargo at International Air Transport Association. Brendan, lovely to see you.
Good to see you too, Chris. Thank you.
All right. And then we've got Glyn Hughes, Director General in the International Air Cargo Association. So Glyn, as always, familiar face, nice to see you.
Likewise, Chris, nice to be here.
Good. And Brandon Freed, Executive Director, Air Forwarders Association. Brandon, lovely to have you on board.
Chris, it's great to be here. Thank you.
And Fabio Gamba, Managing Director, Airport Services Association. So Fabio, lovely to speak to you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite.
Absolute pleasure. Right, lads, listen, I started there with the word collaboration, all right? It's a bit of an overused word, and some people have got different interpretations of it. And a little bit like the title of this digital event, you know, Bring Back Better, another regularly used term now. And what does it actually mean? But we've added make it matter. Now, people like yourselves will be able to influence others to make it matter. But as far as that supply chain togetherness, can you just explain to me now where you feel this collaboration and togetherness has brought us during the pandemic? Because that more than anything has brought on some very, very good and positive changes. So I leave it up to you guys who'd like to leap in first. The water's not deep and it's lukewarm.
Well, I'm happy to jump in first, Chris, because it's always easy to do the stuff and then everybody else kind of comes in and does everything that's more important because I forgot everything that's important, as the old guy on the panel. I think the last 18 months is critical, and you're quite right, Chris. We've been talking about collaboration for, since the beginning of this industry. I very much link collaboration and communication. I don't think you can collaborate unless you're effectively communicating between the partners, first of all. And I think over the last 18 months, we've had many examples from preparation for moving the vaccines, working with state regulators about certification approvals for cargo in cabin, working with the ground handlers about loading cargo in cabin. If you talk about 2 years ago and had gone to the ground handlers on the planet and said, we're going to be probably having a couple of thousand passenger aircraft that we're going to need you to load 2,000 to 3,000 boxes by hand in the overhead compartments and under seats, please. Everybody would have laughed, but it became a seamless process, human chains, quite a lot of innovation. And I think, the communication and collaboration aspect cannot stop with COVID. We shouldn't really talk about it in context with COVID because it then becomes quite easy once the COVID situation becomes a bit of a memory to slip back into the old days. So it's got to be something that's more embedded and endemic across the industry, because it's got to be the only way this industry can fulfill its future ambitions in terms of serving the customer base. Yeah, no, well put. And Glyn, from obviously, those, I mean, everybody knows you, so they know you've just recently moved positions. But now looking at it from the two different sides, are you seeing a different perspective as to what you expect now from collaboration and working together? The only thing I would disagree with you, Chris, it's not two different sides. I think it's from the same side. It's just a different perspective of the same picture that we all look at. We all look at the industry from slightly different perspectives, but it's all about serving the broader community. And, I'm pleased to see that a lot of the initiatives that IATA was engaged in last year, TIACA is very happy to be participating, was happy to be participating in those, and is happy to continue to participating in many of those same sort of initiatives.
Good, it worked then, Glyn, yeah? That question that you asked me to pose to you so you could say it was all the same. All right, I appreciate that. Well done, well answered, mate, as usual. Hey, as usual. Right, who'd like to go next?
Yeah,
go ahead, Brandon.
You're okay, Brandon, go ahead.
Well, I would just like to, I agree with Glenn, and one of the things I've learned through my years in this position at the Air Forwarders Association is that there is in fact strength in numbers. And when we can be unified as an industry with all the associations representing our stakeholders together, we are taken more seriously by lawmakers and regulators.
Yep.
And I'll point to something right now that we're working as an example. Glenn at the International Air Cargo Association has started an environmental sustainability initiative that, and we have as well, but we're working a bit with Glenn in just understanding what they're doing and making sure that we're not stepping on one another's toes, but we're all in the same direction. And I think that's important. Here in the United States, this past summer, as of July 1st, they're mandating 100% screening on all cargo flights as they alleviated the account consignment requirements through ICAO. And we've been coalescing with several associations, including Airports Council International North America, IATA, Airlines for America. And we have to, because as we face these regulators, we really don't get anywhere if we're not unified.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, agree with that. Brendan, I think you were vying for the next position.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I was going to add actually was that I mean, the air cargo industry is kind of undergoing this paradigm shift, right? And we saw this happen throughout the pandemic. It became its and emerged very clearly as its own thing, and all the types of goods and all the ways that we serve the community became very, very front and center in the minds of people in the industry, as well as in the minds of everybody else. When we emptied the front ends of the supply chains day in and day out at the grocery store, we realized how important global supply chains become. And I think, to the point about collaboration, this is a supply chain, and as associations, we're parts of these supply chains. We represent various aspects, or more or less of them, and it's really important that what we do is we take the mindset shift that we had throughout this, right, and we solidify that moving forwards. It's something that is absolutely critical that we not fall back on any old habits, because they exist, and that we need to take the opportunity that was presented and make sure that it is solidified in the way that we do business moving forwards as a supply chain, right? So as associations representative, but also just as a supply chain, as various global networks, make sure that that's something that's in place moving forwards, sharing data, sharing information, communicating better. That's how we get continued agility, because this shift will continue and will become very likely more rapid over time, right? We'll get hit with other things, there will be more change, and we will need to continue to adapt in a very, very fast way. And we've shown it can be done. We've shown that air cargo is very successful at this with the partners, but we can't do that if we roll back to, I don't want to talk to that party, I want to do everything based on paper, and so on and so forth.
Okay, yeah, again, makes sense. And now Fabio.
No, listening to my colleagues who obviously know about cargo much more than I do, and it's interesting to see that actually this very question per se is a non-brainer. As a matter of fact, you would imagine that within the air transport value chain, and cargo being an important, if not essential, aspect of it, collaboration would be automatic. And it's interesting to perhaps think that perhaps 2 years ago, if you have had the same webinar on the topic, maybe ASA wouldn't have been in there, because simply you wouldn't have thought of inviting ASA on this panel. So I think things are evolving. As my colleagues said, we've seen the importance of cargo skyrocketing via the pandemic. And it's become for ground handlers an absolutely essential element of the work, to a point. I can say that to a point whereby for some of them it has been, a lifesaver, really. And I guess that if in the last 18 months or say 2 years time, we haven't heard, and I'm touching wood here, of a lot of failures from ground handling. It was certainly, for a good chunk of it, partly due to the importance of cargo. So back to the point, collaborations, yes, indeed. I'm happy to say that we've taken the matter so seriously that now we have a fully dedicated working group on cargo at ASA, which we didn't have in the past. It was just as, things are coming up. So it was ad hoc. Now it's not ad hoc anymore. It's something that we want to implement for good. So, as a conclusion, I'd say, yeah, obviously collaboration, cooperation is needed. And I think now we're tooled in order to do that.
Okay, good. Now, anybody
Chris,
that wouldn't, sorry,
could I just throw in something else here? Because I think my colleagues raised some good points, and I would like to just kind of express a little area of a little bit of frustration I've had with the industry for the last, whatever it is, 30 odd years that I've been involved in it. We always ask ourselves, in whatever walk of life, is there a best practice example? Can somebody demonstrate to me how things should be done? What does a better world look like? And we have this privilege in the industry of having a number of those examples that we all see every single day, whether or not it's in the road, in the air, on the ground, wherever, which are called the integrators. Where they actually own the supply chain from start to finish, or the process, not the supply chain, but actually the air cargo, the movement part from start to finish. They demonstrate what a truly successful process looks like when you have a shared common vision, when you have integrated processes, when you have no issue about trust of data because you're integrating data at every stage, you're sharing it from start to finish, and you achieve highly successful delivery rates. You've got a highly valued product. And yet the rest of the industry would kind of sit on the side and say, I'm not sure this collaboration thing has a future. And yet daily we can actually see a model. And I think that that's something we haven't really taken advantage of as much. And it's not just in this aspect, but it's in all aspects, is look for those role models, best practices, and really try and exceed and accelerate and go beyond.
Glyn, well put as usual, my friend. And the trouble is, as long as we maintain that reluctance to change or to adapt, and we keep having things as complex as they are, we're always going to be up for another disruptor to come in and take away parts of our business that we thought was always going to be there. So we've got to do things differently. Now, what I was going to say, or what I was going to follow up with is, do you think now that everybody has taken up, or they've taken notice of cargo, that cargo should actually now become its own vertical, a separate entity that's not seen as a byproduct of the passenger model, and that from regulatory and every other perspective, have cargo as a unique independent business? What do you think about that?
I mean, within the airlines, Chris?
Within, yes, yep.
Yeah, well, as Fabio just alluded to, cargo is now sexy. We're popular at the airline board tables, and we've been cargo's been the economic lifeboat throughout the pandemic. So, to your question, absolutely, cargo should have its own vertical within these airlines. It should be taken seriously, because you really never know when you're going to need it again to pandemic levels once this whole thing is over. The reality is that we at the Air Forwarders Association don't think that cargo has been adequately represented within the airlines over the years, but we think that now things are going to change. I've spoken to several airline leaders in the last year, and they've told me, yes, we're definitely going to elevate the cargo director position to have a seat at the table at all times.
Yeah, long overdue. And if you take the same stance or the same subject matter to airports, and before the pandemic, there was lots of issues about slot congestion and priorities and what was going to happen with cargo, etc. Then all of a sudden, like you said, you've got to rely on the only cash cow that's bringing the food in. But do you honestly think that if things do start to come back and capacity comes back to what we would term as normal, that the same priorities will be given to cargo? Or do you think now that cargo-centric airports who are looking at much more future-proofing solutions are going to take up the slack and start moving forward?
If I can chip in here, number of remarks. First one, I think I would concur definitely with Brandon. I think that cargo operations have become much more visible, not only from an airline perspective, but also from a ground handler perspective, as I alluded to before. And that's here to stay, I guess. I can't predict for the future, but certainly for the time being, this is definitely something that is well enshrined in our day-to-day operations. The other remark that I'd like to make is, sometimes I think you need to be careful what you wish for. To achieve a status whereby you're considered as not a spin-off, but certainly as a industry of yourself, obviously has pros and cons.
Yeah.
And we've seen that many times in the past. Once you're in the eye of the regulator, you never know how it can go and it can turn. So even though there are definitely things that could be, made in a way to help promote the sector, there are so many other ways that it could go wrong, because especially in terms of security aspects, in terms of the greening of the industry, as is now the leitmotif or the buzzword of many legislations, that I think looking for a recognition of the sector being recognized as its own sector is a good thing, but with all caveats, as necessary, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, Chris, if we, when you go to business school or when you go to investor school, lesson number one on day number one is you need a balanced and diversified portfolio. Now, the COVID situation has demonstrated that most of the carriers were underweight in a particular sector, which is air cargo. Yeah. And that the balanced, diversified portfolio had become economy, premium economy, and front, whether or not it's first or business class cabins. But it's still pretty much the same model, which is passenger business. So I think you've already started to see a number of carriers who've said that they were underweight in cargo and are going to expand perhaps fleets or perhaps their product portfolio and their range. Because what we've seen over the last 18 months has been devastating to the planet, but by no means should we consider it to be the last time this is going to occur. Yeah. Another disruption to the industry is going to occur. Let's hope it's not as devastating. But even if it was a case of a volcano erupting, as we go back to whenever that was 10 so years ago, and it closed off North Atlantic airspace, things will happen and will disrupt aviation. So I think the airlines are seeing the value of diversification. I do agree with Brandon. I think many of the airlines will upgrade perhaps some of the profile. But I also think that the airlines need to recognize, as they do, that when we return to perhaps some normal passenger volumes, that the balanced fleet will mean that the cargo operation cannot exist in isolation. You've got a lot of very successful models. If you take the Emirates, you take Lufthansa, just to name two, Qatar, those Turkish, there are many, many out there that balance an incredibly dynamic freighter fleet with some globally connected passenger networks and integrate those incredibly well. Yeah. So I think that there's probably no one size fits all, but I think, to Brandon's point, that the profile will hopefully remain at that high level and the portfolio will perhaps get a little bit more balanced going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Brandon, just on a couple of points there. If you look at the habits now or the requirements and the demands of some of the forwarders, and they're acquiring their own capacity in their own space, because obviously capacity is limited, etc. But they also want to be in more control, and for the fact that they can go to more cargo friendly airports as well. I mean, that's here and it's not going to go away.
I would fully agree. As a matter of fact, freight forwarders are hired by shippers to bring creative solutions to complex logistical problems. And in this case, if the Port of Los Angeles is going to have 64 vessels waiting berths, forwarders are going to start chartering ships and docking them in ports that are lesser known. At the same time, if the airline capacity is down, they're going to charter airplanes. And they'll get lift their capacity wherever they can. This is what we do. Nature abhors a vacuum, and I think that this is what the life is like in freight forwarding. You always have to be creative and you have to bring these solutions to the table. So I think we're going to continue to see these approaches to solving these logistical issues for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think it's also going to put a little bit more pressure on some of what we consider to be standards
I think if we want to talk about the missing piece, I think it has to do with connectivity, the way these parties connect to each other.
Yep.
We can talk about that in a few different ways. One of them is going to be data. So the way they actually connect to each other to share data to make this kind of seamless. And then the other is going to be the way you connect disparate entities. These are unique companies, right? They all have their own business drives, and so connecting their supply chains up, you know, it may or may not be as simple as we describe it from a supply chain perspective, right? But that connectivity is sometimes missing, and so the collaborative space that we see ourselves in now, it goes quite a long way, but not if we're not going to sort of connect all the different pieces together, if that makes sense. I think there needs to be enhanced sharing of information, data sharing, in order to get end-to-end transparency, end-to-end visibility, in order to allow for and it does happen. It's not to say that it doesn't happen. There's plenty of instances where we have end-to-end connected supply chains, orchestrated by very professional freight forwarders and, you know, other entities in this business who kind of pull all of those parts together. But it's not as simple as it could be if we were sharing information better, more efficiently, and in an end-to-end fashion. You know, right now, the way we share data tends to be a little bit spotty in many instances, which is not what you want if you're going to try and optimize processes and provide seamless levels of service across the entire supply chain.
Yep. If I may, Chris, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that the level of automation within the freight forwarding industry needs to increase.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, communication between the freight forwarder and the airlines needs to be consistent, and obviously automation drives a lot of that. But in terms of communication and automation that's shared with the actual customer, that's between the freight forwarder and that customer, we believe. And, you know, I mean, it's part of our secret sauce, so to speak. You know, McDonald's they don't talk to the head of Burger King to find out what's in their sauce. You know, they go ahead and make their own Big Macs, and that's the way it is in the freight forwarding industry. However, our primary vendors, which in this case are the airlines, the trucking companies, and the airports, now need to be communicative with our industry and make sure that we're connected in a level that allows us to provide the level of information that we need to communicate with our actual customers.
And I think that's, if I may, sorry, just to jump in very quick with a comment, Chris. There's a lot of other industries we can take inspiration from. Brandon's just correctly made the reference to the fact of the interface with the customer. And if we look at the financial services industry, you know, there's 16, 20,000, whatever it is, financial institutions that amongst themselves can share information sufficiently to move money around the planet in any currency, at any level, at any time, with minimal delay. And yet that doesn't interfere with the transactional aspect of how each of the financial institutions interact with their frontline customer, allowing them to offer different products, different solutions, different degrees of service. But it's what happens behind that. And I think that comes into, and I think Brendan was quite right when he talks about connectivity. And that's perhaps where we need to spend more time in the industry of saying that we're all going to run different businesses, but what are the subcomponents, using your Lego reference, to allow us all to connect?
Yep. No, I agree. And it's a little bit like rugby or American football. You know, the days of not knowing who played where are long gone. Now you can see exactly what position is what and what they have to do for the team. And, you know, I think that's where we're coming as well. Now, Fabio, something I'd just like to ask you. We've seen from the forwarding community, if they need a solution, they'll go and get one. Okay. Now, and this is just my personal opinion, I think two of the biggest influencers now moving forward are the airports and the handling agents. And if they got together, and if the airports have a substantial, you know, ecosystem approach as to certain codes of practice that should be happening in that particular airport, whether it's to do with greater control on future-proofing facilities, infrastructure, bringing in associated industries if they've got the spare land and capacity, but looking at it from a much, much bigger perspective and having certain standards so that when carriers or customers are looking and they're saying, well, if I need my business handled, I'm going to go to that particular airport because. Do you think there's an appetite now for some of the, and especially the top performing GHAs, to get together more with the airports and start influencing what's going on and also what's happening and the way they're expected to run facilities?
Yeah, that's a little bit the million-dollar question, I'd say. I mean, we've always had a very interesting relationship with the airports in the sense that obviously in most parts of the world, ground handlers depend on the license that is being granted by the airports to operate at. Now, what we've realized perhaps more than ever before is that during the crisis, cargo has sometimes become the source of delays because there was not enough spare capacity available at this particular handler at this particular airport. And so handlers started thinking, it's a bit ridiculous that we would lose the whole market simply because that handler couldn't handle the cargo coming up at that time at that particular airport. Why didn't we talk amongst ourselves first, and second with the airport, to make sure that actually it was in the interest of everyone that this particular cargo could arrive at that particular point in time and not being directed somewhere else because this particular handler couldn't make it. So why don't we talk to each other? I think that was my point. So why don't we talk together amongst ourselves first? It's always complicated because of competition issues, obviously. And then why don't we try and use the roof of the airport to try and see, what is it that we can offer, not only on one-on-one, but with in mind the fact that we need to think of the benefits of the whole platform at the station. And so to your point, yes, indeed, I think that is pushing us to not so much understand, because we already knew that before, but perhaps we've never felt the need to do it. But that certainly has pushed us to now implement this further step towards discussing with the airports to see if, amongst the airports and the handlers, there is a way that we can optimize our capacity and function on the basis of the needs of the cargo freight forwarders.
Okay.
Just that was perhaps a direct response to your question. Back to, I guess, another point that was made by one of my colleagues before, and it's interesting to see that obviously, I think it was Glyn who mentioned that the financial service industry, and that's an interesting example because we are here to deal with an industry that is probably without any frontier. With respect to cargo, we're not there yet, unfortunately. I mean, we're still talking about open skies agreements amongst states. And as long as we are dependent on these open skies agreements, we are light years away from the financial service industry that was mentioned. And it can only be an ideal to try and reach, but unfortunately, the reality is far from there. And I'm wondering whether, and this is something that I'd already thought at the time, and perhaps there are ongoing thoughts with that respect today, whether a specific regime for cargo operators under the open skies type of discussions, or bilateral discussions, or multilateral discussions, should not see, or should not have a new, let's say, impetus from the authorities, especially given the importance that cargo has taken during the pandemic. I'm just leaving it there, but perhaps a way to go.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
And could I just come in on that, Chris, because I think that's a good point there, and I think Fabio mentions it, that one of the challenges, and as you know, Chris, from your industry knowledge here, is that the challenge that the ground handlers have is that the ever-increasing demands for sensitive supply chain and handling is coupled with ever-increasing demands for lower rates.
Yep.
And sadly, an environment where contracts are quite fluid. Yep. So you don't have the tenure of being able to invest in the long run, because you might be losing customers month to month, 60 days, 30 days, whatever, which makes it a very difficult situation to actually invest in, which then in turn leads to sometimes some challenges with the quality of the handling that's then provided. You then have other situations where state regulations restrict the amount of competition. So it means that it's difficult sometimes then to have multiple scenarios. Some carriers are then restricted from being able to self-handle. So there are a lot of challenges, and I think Fabio is quite right there, that the regulatory regime needs to look at that as well, because there are many examples of where carriers would like to handle themselves but are restricted from doing so. And the whole supply chain and the complexity of it, and this comes back to connectivity, we still have situations where the airline and the ground handler and the freight forwarder are not effectively communicating sufficiently, so that when the freight forwarder, and as Brandon has said, he's dealing with a customer that could be bringing in $10 million worth of very sensitive product, he communicates with the carrier who may not have communicated with the ground handler. Yep. So the ground handler could receive this cargo saying, oh, I wish I'd have known a little bit earlier. So there's lots of aspects that we really need to tackle, again, to make sure that the forwarder is fully empowered to satisfy those demands of his customer, and in fact allay any concerns up front and saying, don't worry, we're all ready and prepared for this cargo throughout the entire supply chain.
Yeah, but I mean, over years and years, there's been a lot of discussion as to why, you've got SLAs and contracts between the carrier and the GHA, and then you've got agreements between the forwarder and the carrier, but the forwarder doesn't get access to talk to the GHA. Exactly. And vice versa. And if you try and explain that to a first year business degree set of students, they go, what? It doesn't make sense. And also, when now you got four respected individuals like yourselves with your own organizations, and obviously you guys have to listen, you have to learn, you have to lobby, and you have to leverage. And that's what ICAO wants. They want more leverage, more lobbying, so that the states come up with something that makes a lot more sense because of SME interaction. And then ICAO can sort of turn around and say, right, this is a must, this is what you must do, etc. And I think most of the industry, they actually want to do the right thing, but they want somebody else to tell them first, so they don't feel as if they're going to lose out competitively by the first one who steps over the line. And I think that's something that all four of your organizations now, you need to bring all that together and all be singing the same tune, even if it's with a different instrument.
Brandon, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I think Brandon is trying to speak. Yeah.
Somebody, that went down well. Who's trying to speak now? Brendan.
Well, it was Brandon.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Yes.
Okay, real quick. I'm sorry. The only thing I would say this is that ground handling is a competitive industry, and the airlines contract to these ground handlers. And I noticed that oftentimes the airline is suspiciously not at the table when we're dealing with a constantly oversubscribed, congested airport scenario throughout the world right now. We see it here in the United States. The airports have to be there. If airports cannot produce cargo in a timely fashion, and they make themselves tough to deal with, forwarders are going to seek other sources. As an example, here in the United States, we're seeing Rickenbacker has exploded in popularity. I was over in Rockford last week talking to Ken Ryan over there. We're going to see more of that. We're seeing Ontario and the same thing, right? So obviously, this is a business problem, and they have to step up to the plate. Now, they're going to say, well, we're having a tough time finding personnel. And I'm not arguing that. That's a big issue. But, you have to look at your pay structures. You look at what you're doing. And then, of course, you have to look to local authorities in making sure these people can get badged and they can get to their jobs quickly. But please understand that this is a competitive problem. And we don't want to wait around for regulatory authorities to tell us how to run our business. I think that's a mistake.
No, but not wait around for them to tell us how, but some things that could be made. Now, at the very beginning, we're talking about something that's been around probably since Adam probably decided that it was easier to take a bite out of the apple than it was to get rid of docs and airway bills and paperwork. And why wasn't he tempted with something else? Because for me, it seems absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, well, why are governments, so to that, Chris, why are governments still requiring paperwork in a lot of export and import transactions?
Exactly.
Right? And that's why a lot of freight forwarders oftentimes include a document pouch with their shipments, because they're nervous about some customs authority at the other end saying, I want that in paper form. So now your shipment's going to be held in for 3 days until we get that piece of paper over here. That's one of the reasons why we haven't adopted a fully electronic environment right now.
100%.
And in fact, that one that goes to the point that Plan B travels with Plan A. How inefficient is that?
Right. I was a forwarder for a lot of years. Let me tell you something. No box ever went out without a document pouch attached.
But isn't that such a shame?
It's terrible.
That collectively, all the representative bodies and the different divisions within the business cannot say we must have, we need, it must be done.
Right. That's true. But you also have to remember countries compete with one another. And of course, it's a revenue component as well. And, they'll say it's into the guise of protecting their citizenry. But the reality is you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And like I said, if it carries on like that, then somebody somewhere will just step into an opportunity and then we'll lose another chunk of the business. Mm-hmm. Now, something, and Brendan, you brought it up earlier, which was to do with data, big data and data sharing. Now, that 2 words, data sharing, also seems to be a little bit of a paradox, because it's like when you're at school, you say to your friends, yeah, I'd love to share your toys, but don't come near mine. And this data sharing, it should be a lot more open. And I just had an interesting discussion with one of your colleagues, Brendan, Matthew Vaughan, and a couple of other gentlemen. And we were talking about cybersecurity and, about this pandemic making people realize that you need to be aware of worst case scenarios and adapt to it when it's when it happens, rather than be focused on lovely budget planning and then get a shock and have to react to something that kicks you in the backside. So there is going to be a different type of a crisis that's going to hit us. But this data sharing, it's the only way forward. And so everybody needs to put certain practices in to make sure that it's as secure as possible, but also to make sure that all the different areas within our businesses are aware of what degree of concern and problems they can have if they don't focus on this cybersecurity issue, because it's one weak link can bring us all into some terrible situations. And just recently, look at the examples that have come out.
Yeah, I mean, so I believe digitalization as a whole underpins all kinds of topics that we're talking about here, and the way that we communicate with each other and the way that information is made available from the ground handler through the airline via airports to the forwarder so that he can actually share it with the customers. I think this is critical. It makes us better organizations. It allows us to be more efficient as a business. It also will ultimately allow us to lobby more effectively in some instances, where we can go more strongly to certain states and say, okay, your practices actually are not in tune, one, with the best business practices, and 2, with what is safe, because we can show you, we can demonstrate other ways of doing this business. But we can do that better when we have shared data, when we've done some of the pilots that we see around the world, and we really put that into operational practice and start to scale up quite rapidly. I think this is really key. You're right. There will probably be another shock that will hit aviation. They tend to come in about 10-year cycles. When COVID hit, we were on year 12-ish, give or take.
Yeah.
You know, and they don't normally cut this deep or for this long, but they happen. They happen with some regularity in our business. And air cargo needs to be as ready as any other business to offer resilient solutions. To me, that means that we look at all the various risks, right? And we mitigate them to the extent that we can. Cybersecurity, to me, is one of those big risks with data sharing. The rewards, though, to data sharing are far too large to have that be something that we say, we're not going to do that because we're a little bit afraid of what could happen. Because there's certainly plenty of major businesses in this world that have built their entire business on data, on digital transactions, do so very well and protect the security and integrity of that data. You know, we look at e-commerce. We expect that e-commerce will hit in air cargo 20% of the air cargo business in the next year. It's an entirely digital business to start with, right? And then, you know, hopefully we don't go and ask them to complete a bunch of paper documents, but you know, that's kind of the reality. It starts digital and it ends digital, and that's all the customer wants, is they want all of their levels of service and all of their visibility on what's happening 100% digitally. They just want their goods physically.
Yeah. Exactly, Brendan. On that reference you made there now to e-commerce, and obviously one of the things that's causing big concern now is the amount of undeclared dangerous goods that's appearing. Is there not a way now to up and downstream you know, secure that with the types of data sharing that everybody has to go through with regards to the e-commerce bookings, whether it's a company or an individual?
There certainly is. I mean, data allows you to explore and start to search through much more of that to be able to figure out if that perhaps could contain dangerous goods. Get some of the individuals selling things who maybe just don't know. They're the blissfully unaware of the regulations. It doesn't necessarily help you when it comes to those who are willfully non-compliant. There we need governments to actually step up and do their job and really penalize these people for doing so. But we can use data, we can use other techniques as well. So we need to start using up and downstream techniques to begin to secure the supply chain and allow for the goods to move efficiently, right? Yeah, we have more for sure in terms of overall goods that are flowing. But it doesn't mean that we can't use risk mitigation approaches that we have today that allow you to kind of secure your supply chain. And that's in some extent that's part of what a freight forwarder offers, right? They offer this knowledge of a shipper that is you know, very you know, very deep and very connected to their shippers. They understand their businesses, and they allow then airlines and ground handlers to do business with many more entities as a result of that, right? By being this great funnel and net in the same process. And I think if we do this together, so on e-commerce, we've looked at e-commerce code of conduct. Now we can work with different parties to really put meaningful risk mitigations in place. I think we can keep that risk low as reasonably acceptable.
Okay, good. Thanks very much for that.
Chris, I'll tell you though, at the same time, we can't give governments a pass here. They need to step up to the plate and start enforcing these regulations. I mean, I have a meeting this afternoon at 2:00 of the Lithium Battery Coalition here in Washington. There's a measure that's been put before the U.S. Congress and requiring that batteries to be transported at a lower state of charge to mitigate, as Brendan just said, some of the risks. But the reality is that governments need to step up and start enforcing manufacturing standards. They need to be educating. Why are we as an industry the guardians of the gate here? We're trying to protect our business model and our assets, but the reality is governments are not doing their part here. And we need to hold them accountable, continue to do so.
100%. A lot
totally
more
agree
lobbying, a lot more leveraging.
Yeah, and just on that part, and I think Brandon's 100% spot on, because you know we've seen the issue with lithium battery challenges over the last few years, and sadly, well, in fact, first of all, positively, the regulations in place seem to be working. The regulations in place, when they are complied with, do not pose a general issue with regards to the situation. If the lithium battery shipments are packed, prepared, presented, handled, labeled, documented, transported today in the reduced state of charge that the regulations already require, then they don't pose a significant issue. The problem is smuggling, counterfeit. And that's the issue, that the industry should not be held accountable, should not be made responsible. It is not our part. We don't go through on the passenger side and open up every single suitcase to make sure that they're not bringing back counterfeit handbags when they go away on holiday. So why should we on the cargo side be held accountable or asked to be held accountable by the regulators? Brandon is absolutely correct. And the problem is that when issues occur with smuggled or counterfeit lithium batteries, they usually occur in the country of destination or transit, not in the point of origin. And it's those states where the problems are identified need to then challenge the states where the problem originated and say, you need to find the culprit, you need to hold this culprit to account for their actions and publicly make an example of them. To this date, I'm not aware of, and maybe Brandon or Brendan can, or Fabio can correct me, I'm not aware of anybody that's had significant jail time, other than a few people have had some fines for misdeclared or counterfeit lithium batteries. And we've seen a number of high profile incidents in terms of fires and others. And that situation is just unacceptable.
And, you know, as Willie Walsh and Willie Walsh was at the CNS conference and we were talking about this, we mentioned this and, you know, unfortunately the price of failures is too high for us. That's one of the reasons why we need to be assertive. But at the same time, as I said, you know, we need to be much more impactful in governments and making sure that they understand what's at stake here.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Now, another risk, and I'm not sure who briefly covered it, is the next generation of colleague or employee and succession management and leadership training. So one of the things I just wanted to ask there, Fabio, is as far as the GHAs are concerned, they're more often than not hit with, you know, having you know, pricing forced down and you know, comparisons with other handling agents who are willing to offer a lower rate, etc. They're saying how difficult it is. Now, at the end of the day, we've only got two products: value products and volume products. So why is there not a clearer or more transparency as to what you expect as customer service for a value product and what you expect from a volume product, and that it sticks to it? Because far too often, you know, people are trying to dilute the services and the costs for a value product down to the volume product. And it causes an awful lot of confusion within the GHA community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you've summed up a little bit the fate of ground handling here by stating what you just did. Indeed, the race to the bottom of this industry is well known. I'm not going to come back on this. But it's true that we are a bit like in a snake that bites its own tail, especially in a crisis situation whereby you have airlines closing their eyes on their contractors, including ground handlers, cutting corners just for them to be able to match the requests on, you know, cheaper service. Simply because they cannot afford to pay what they used to pay beforehand, and that obviously, you know, implies that we have to make a number of choices. So I think we are seeing that the current model of ground handling, as we understand it, is certainly questionable. The very fact that we are under a squeeze, if you will, between on the one side the SLAs and very easy termination clauses, because in the end the airlines have the power to impose the terms and conditions they want. And on the other side, the airports and their own terms via or granted via the licenses that we get, you know, makes us extremely fragile. In terms of, you know, what we can do and how we can respond. And hence what we're saying is that whatever the airline wants, it gets it. And in pandemic times, what it wants is simply cheap, a cheaper service.
Yeah.
And so he gets it. Now, I'm just extrapolating a little bit, and obviously now what we're seeing a beginning of a recovery, and again, I'm touching wood. We're seeing the airlines telling us now, you're not, accompanying our growth fast enough. You need to ramp up with your personnel and with your capacity. And this is something that we have a lot of problems, being able to offer, because as someone put it, I think it was Brendan, we need to batch people. We need to hire these people. We need to train them, and it takes weeks, if not months, before we can ramp up. So that's an interesting situation whereby we were forced to lay off skilled personnel that we're being asked to ramp up. We have all the difficulties in the world to try and figure out how to do that in an efficient and cost-efficient way as well. So I guess again, that's always the snake that is biting its own tail.
Yeah, and it's
In fact,
crazy.
Chris, sorry, can I just jump in with something here? Because I think Fabio put it well, and I'd like to quote former colleague Arian Zimmerman here. The supply chain is a whole series of separate entities, as Brendan said, all running different businesses, but there are some common themes that should run through, which is buy what you need, sell what you can deliver, and deliver what you actually sell. And too often we get people saying, look, I don't want to pay for the premium product. I want the premium product, so I'm going to stick a label on it, but I want to pay less.
Yeah.
And whether or not you do that with a trucking company, with a freight forwarder, with a ground handler, with an airline, the minute you start adapting that type of policy, you're undermining the ability for your partner, your customer, your vendor to deliver what's actually needed here. So I think those are just three very simple principles, which comes with transparency as well. We say that the air cargo industry is the premium industry for moving cargo around the world. We are moving 35% of international trade by value, and we try and nickel and dime when we do it. We try and do it with paper rather than digital processes. And I'm going to quote another, industry man that I look up to, which is Ashwin Bhatt, formerly of Swiss, now at Lufthansa, who said we're really about a phygital industry, which is moving physical goods in a fully digital environment. And only then can we leverage and maximize the value that we can truly bring.
Yeah. No, you're right there. And about, whether it's value product or not, it's also bad, Glyn, where you get pieces, delivered, and that where they're from, and what's in there, but they haven't been labeled as such. They haven't been recorded as such, and that's also wrong. And it's crazy. And if we're going to do anything about that, we've got to change all of that. Now, one of the things just wanted to ask you, Brandon, as well is, and I've been on most sides of the fence, but the one thing I asked once was, the top forwarders that I know wouldn't ask a GHA to have an SLA or a KPI matrix like the carrier is asking. So why on earth is that?
Well, first of all, again, our contractual arrangement is with the airline, not with the ground handler at these airports. So, the reality is when we sit down with an airline, we usually have there's a pricing discussion, there's a service level discussion, and there are several components to that agreement. And then the airline turns to the ground handler and says, this is what we're going to need. Now that's their business relationship. Now we want to help as much as we can, but there are certain areas that the freight forwarder is just not party to. I mean, we're talking about, I think we're having two pathways of discussion here. We're having one that has to deal with a free market and market opportunities and how you perform given the market conditions. And then, of course, you have this regulatory discussion, which is inflexible. As you just mentioned, Chris, I mean, if someone's going to misdeclare on an air bill and they're not going to label their freight properly, that's a regulatory issue.
Yeah.
And we need to live by the rule of law. On the other hand, if we're talking about tendering times and the acceptance levels and service parameters, that's a market competitive discussion. And obviously it comes right down to it. If a freight forwarder cannot get the service that he or she needs in a particular market, they're going to pull out and seek another alternative, whether that's another carrier or whether that's another airport. That's just the market we thrive in. Don't forget, there are about 100,000 freight forwarders in the world right now. Heck, there are 4,000 registered with the TSA here in the United States. It's a highly competitive business. And, customers will not take failure for an answer.
Yeah. Which is why the four of you and everybody else, we have to get together and make it as effective as possible.
Absolutely.
Now coming, Brendan, one of the things that I know you're hot on, and Glyn, you also, from our times with the various committees and trying to standardize things and make things simple, like the simplified SLA and everything else. Holy mother of Moses, the difficulties in just trying to come to an agreement with something so bloody simple. It sometimes makes you want to, do you know what I mean? It just makes you mad. But now one of the things that I think we've got to be very careful of is, and all industries are suffering now, especially the hospitality. Good people, how do we keep them? How do we make them want to stay in this industry and see it as a career and an opportunity? We have got to do so many things differently across the whole board. And on a personal note, and I'm a little bit caveman-y, I think there's a little bit too much negative press with anxieties and all these things that are coming about as pandemic and staying at home and work and everything. I just think now people need to be aware they need to enhance their own personal value to look after themselves and their families. And to do so, they need to be encouraged to take on more knowledge, more understanding. There needs to be more flexibility. And I remember when I first started out in Lufthansa, we were on a shift one night and there was only one person on exports to do the freighter. And I just said to the supervisor, I said, look, why don't we get some of the import guys who don't really do anything at the moment until they've got to do all the clearance and everything. Why don't we get them to help? No, you can't do that because they're imports, we're exports. And we had a similar issue down in the warehouse because there was nobody able to drive a forklift. Now, I think now is the time for multi-skilled and people to decide whether or not, they want to be more valuable as a personal asset. And also for airports, GHAs, et cetera, to start looking at pooling, whether it's pooling of a high-skilled task force, whether it's pooling of certain equipment, releasing some of these assets that are hanging around all over the airports and introducing some good old-fashioned standards, because I've never seen anybody walk in to a beautiful top-end hotel and start slinging rubbish around everywhere. They tend to sort of, I better comply, And I just think we need to start coming back now to some good old-fashioned standards and allow people to do more if they're willing and not complain if they're not.
I'll say what our president says, and the way he says it, pay them more. Right? But it doesn't stop there. It also begins with, if it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to get a worker credentialed at a major airport, we have a government problem. And that needs to be addressed. We have an airport congestion committee within the Air Forwarders Association, and we're picking low-hanging fruit right now. We're approaching CBP. We're approaching the various airports. They need to realize that, and by the way, they have a tremendous security obligation. They just can't let anyone on that airport property, right? Of course. But the reality is it doesn't take 4 to 6 weeks to process a worker, because that's why these ground handlers are losing these workers. They'll go work at Burger King, right? And so we need to make sure that they understand that. And Brendan and Glyn, that's an area that the three of us could be working on together with these different cities. It's different, by the way, here in the United States. Every airport's different. You can't use an Atlanta in Chicago, right? So, but it does also start. You need to pay workers what they're worth in the current market.
Yeah, and we've seen that now with drivers. I mean, I never thought you could be sitting having a good old English breakfast and have somebody come up to you and offer you $2,000 if you committed to join their business. It's madness.
Yeah. I might be leaving for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but sorry, Brandon, I just got to tell you something that I seen, which I thought was fantastic marketing. I took 2 guys, we were having a workshop and they said, we just want a quick burger. So I just took them to to the first burger place, and they were doing these adverts for jobs in this particular burger unit. It won't take you too much to work out it was, but their sign was, "Why work for a clown when you can work for a king?"
Well said. Well said. Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? We need to.
And by the way, as you know, Chris, we're not the only industry facing this challenge.
Exactly.
It's all over the place.
Exactly. But the one thing is, if we looked at it differently now, and also I think there's too much training, and the training takes too much time, and people don't see it as a good return on investment, so they're a little bit reluctant to release certain people. All of us here have been on training courses where the trainer is doing a little bit of an icebreaker and says, "Fred, why are you here?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. The manager just sent me because Bill couldn't make it." And the amount of wasted effort and time, you know, all these areas need to be changed now so that we're more effective and we're more dynamic, and we let people know what a wonderful opportunity this is, because all of us have had the chance to work abroad, to do things we never thought we would do, to see things we never thought we would see. And it's all possible because whatever you do where an aircraft lands, you can do in any country that it lands.
That's right. That's why training needs to be more efficient. That's why IATA is doing online training now for their dangerous goods and many others areas. These are important. You need to make training as efficient as possible. Absolutely, but you can't relax your standards for training.
And we need to get a more competent-based global passport in place for training and qualification.
I think the move towards competency-based training and assessment is going to, I mean, this is something that's been happening in aviation for a little while, and in the dangerous goods side, it's really going quite full steam ahead. And it's a really good model that allows an employer to then look and say, okay, well, what do my employees need training on? You know, can I categorize my staff and put together an entire competency package? There will be a level of harmonization or standardization in those kinds of competency packages. And then the job of the employer is just to say, how do I make sure that these people are competent on an ongoing basis? And less of the emphasis on how do I deliver that many different trainings, right? And that's the reality of what we have today is we have sort of legacy regulatory training stacked on top of each other in order to create a fully licensed and qualified individual. And I think if we move down the path very quickly, is my opinion, of competency-based training and assessment, we get to a place where some of what you described, you know, the ability to, you know, maybe share employees. I don't know if that's going to be the reality, but it becomes a possibility, which right now it's not really even feasible for an organization to think that way. And, you know, basically what we're doing is you create standardization, you create sort of the frameworks around this. Employees have better understanding of what it is that they're supposed to do on the job. I mean, I can tell you that my first job in aviation was a baggage handler, and I was very close to going for the local grocery store instead, because it was significantly easier to get to the local grocery store than it was to get to the airport through the security controls. And I didn't really know what it was that I was supposed to do on a daily basis. I didn't understand the impact of my job. We have an opportunity in front of ourselves right now with the pandemic and what's happened to really describe the value of air cargo in a new way to a new segment of people. Then we train them properly, and we can validate their ongoing competency. We give everybody a much better experience. Although I will say what happened in the pandemic was a lot of organizations were forced to let people go from the top, right? So you let your most tenured, your most senior individuals go. You also let go from the bottom of your list. And so you don't have junior people to kind of work up through the ranks. So we really have to put a concerted effort into attracting talent back into this industry.
Exactly.
And also passing some of that experience on. And just on what you said, Brendan, how lucky are we? In a different world, you might have been head of green vegetables now or something.
Just one thing on the, sorry, Fabio, carry on.
Just very quickly, you know, there are two things. The first one is, I think generally we've seen a loss of you know, glee and attractiveness from this industry towards the new generations. You know, everyone, when we were kids, we were probably dreaming of becoming a pilot or whatever, and we all had these 747 models in our room and stuff. I don't think the new generation thinks that way. So this is a question that we need to ask ourselves: why is it the case? The second thing is, yeah, indeed, we need to recognize skills of employees. We've not been good at doing that, and there are a lot of bright people now trying to think on how this could be done. We're discussing the matter at the moment with IATA, and I'm sure TIACA and others are doing the same. It's really a question of being able to recognize the skills. At the same time, skills have a cost. And when you come to a pandemic, the first thing that you want to do is to get rid of the costs. So these skilled people are sometimes the first ones to be ousted. And then you find yourself only with the junior people, as Ben said. So I think we need to give it, much further thoughts on how to do that. But recognition of the skills and the fact that it can be used across the board, whether at different airports or with different companies, is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Chris, if I was just going to sort of touch upon the training and the next generation in one quick statement, which is we all agree that this industry's future success relies on a far more digital industry. We know that. That's not disputable. It requires innovation, entrepreneurship, and thought leading and new solutions. That requires the next generation. The next generation, and I don't want to use this word flippantly, is the TikTok generation. They get their content in 1 minute tranches, recently extended to 3 minutes. And that caused a huge upheaval. People weren't sure that they could actually survive watching a content for 3 minutes. So if you then join the air cargo industry saying, great news, welcome to the job, quick run round, and we're going to now send you for 10 days to sit in the classroom and listen to somebody, I won't say an old fuddy duddy like Glyn or somebody standing in front, but listen to somebody who's going to talk this. That's not how the next generation takes their content. We have to design it around modular, digital, flexible, aligns to their needs, constantly adding value to them so that they can actually see self-development and growth, constantly reminding them that the value that this industry brings, which is how many lives it saves, how many economies it actually helps get out of the poverty trap, how many of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that it actually supports, how the integrated economies of this world will lead to a much more safe and protected environment for all, how it will actually add social benefits, how it is an equalizer to allow equal opportunities for men, women, and all different genders, races, etc., can add their wealth or add their value in the global economy, particularly in the e-commerce environment. And we have to get that message out there about the relevance and benefit of this industry to the kids when they're still in high school, before they start making career decisions.
Yes, Glyn, and I would agree on most of that. And the TikTok and everything like that. I mean, I've got kids. It's fantastic how quick they can take things in and how quick they want it. But it's not necessarily the only way and the best way. And there's a balance. There's a balance. And if everything, like in society at the moment, is being pushed because of being trendy or being new, we got a there's a big danger there of, we're all going to be pushed and we're going to go over the edge. There needs to be a balance, and that blended competence is important, but it's also something that, you mustn't just be corralled because of what's happening. There has to be a balance, and there's a lot in our industry that can't be done just that quick and get knowledge that quick and get action that quick. So there still has to be a modicum of balance. And I think the earlier that our industry starts to attract people with certain values and certain priorities and certain historic successes, the better that they will be able to adapt and balance both and influence it. Otherwise, the pendulum just keeps swinging from the widest ends, and that's not good. But that's just my opinion. So, but gentlemen, I said at the beginning, I would be asking you for 3 things that you feel would make a huge impact on the business within the next 6 to 9 months, and that would be critical for the business. If you could give me those, I would really appreciate it, because what we're going to do is we're going to put it up on a notice board, and then when we get to Rome next year, please God, we'll see how many are up there and how relevant they were when we look back on what we did this couple of days. So whoever'd like to go first, please feel free.
I'll go first, if I may. Okay. First of all, if I have my magic wand and I can wave it, I would say reduce regulations.
Right.
We're a unregulated industry, and here in the United States, we've got de facto regulation with security requirements and all kinds of mishigash that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is we need to address this dangerous goods challenge, this lithium battery challenge, because God forbid one incident can throw us out of business. We don't need to be there. And then I think, no lesser importance is the airport congestion dilemma. I mean, this has got to be solved. We can't have truckers waiting 4 to 6 hours to tender and recover cargo at these major airports. Yeah. And I'm going to sneak another one in as long as the time is right. We need to deal with the seaports also and the detention and demurrage issue out there, but we can talk about that at another time.
Yeah, and the point you made there about airport congestion as well, in the same breath, people will be talking about having green plans and everything, and it doesn't make sense where some of them in cold environments, they're leaving the engines running to keep warm, and it's just unnecessary. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much, Brandon. Who's next?
I'll go next, and I think 6 to 9 months is quite a difficult challenge. I actually like Brandon's. I think they're all actually great for that time frame. But I'd like to throw in sustainability. I'd like to see it. We as TIACA do a survey once a year. And I would like to see that the next one we do, well, we're going to be doing one at the end of this year, but the one we do at the end of next year, I would like to see 100% of respondents actually say that they've got a strategy to address sustainability. And sustainability is not just the environment, it's people, planet, and prosperity. It's all aspects. And I think that that's one significant area. I would also like to see, over the last 12 to 18 months, I've seen a lot of quite good innovations taking place. And I would like to see that pace of innovation continuing. It was born out of necessity through COVID, but I would like to see it born out of necessity to improve and take this industry to new heights. Now, how do you measure that? I think you can measure it by 2 factors. Number one, which is the Glyn doesn't understand it factor, which is, you show something to Glyn and he just doesn't understand it, which means it's pretty cool, because I still think in the old world, or just the cool index. You see something, whether or not it's on a webinar at an industry event somewhere, and just the number of people say, that's cool. Just nodding heads in the audience is a good way of saying that that's doing something different and new. And I think for my third one would be the digital. I don't know how it's measured. I'll leave that to Brendan to comment on how best to measure. That's always one challenge. When you sit in that seat at IATA, people always want to poke you and say, how do you measure digitalized acceptance in the industry? But I think this digital connectivity, we must continue on the path that we've started and that we've been accelerating in the last 12 to 18 months.
Good. Well done, Glyn. Thank you very much. Next.
I'll try. Although on my list, I think everything is already been said, but I'd like to look at this from perhaps a slightly different perspective. That first and foremost, as we started the discussion with collaboration, and we've heard a lot about advocacy and red tape and this type of things. I think that it doesn't, take a genius to try and see the importance now of cargo having been, boosted in the last 2 years. And I think it would require us a bit more collaboration amongst ourselves to try and sell a good story to the various governments around the world, which, let's be honest, so far we've not been really capable of doing. So that would be first on my list. The second one is a mixture between digitalization and sustainability. I think these are 2 absolutely crucial aspects of not only cargo, but air transport in general. With that digitalization, you're not making this job more interesting, and hence you're having people moving away from this industry, which is more and more seen as a 20th century type of industry rather than new century industry. And sustainability, and I'm seeing that from a European perspective, is absolutely crucial. That's the buzzword of the European Commission. That's only what matters. And you can only be considered as long as you bring your rocks into the edifice of sustainability. So yes, indeed, if the air transport industry and cargo in particular could have a plan for how they could bring their sustainability with commitments, for instance. These were only two things, but I think that's sums it up quite nicely.
Okay, I'll put them. Yep. So digitalization and sustainability, I'll put them as 2 and 3. Brendan?
It's fun to go last. Thank you, gentlemen, for saying all the really good ones. So I'm going to echo on digitalization. I think it underpins so much of what we're doing. I think one of the ways that we can go about measuring this is we're looking at digital maturity. So to what degree is an organization digital? And with that, we've got sustainability components. So ways that we can actually track the progress of that. Well, one, understand a baseline for digital maturity for these organizations, and then expand that into, okay, well, how are we progressing along certain metrics? One of the things that I think is missing in some instances is the implementation of certain standards in order to get us to leverage and scale up globally. So we'll want to be able to look at how we can do that. In particular, I think on the distribution side of things as an example, so using modern approaches to actually distribute capacity and be able to do those things. We see lots of different implementations, but not necessarily harmonized and standardized ones that can be then ultimately a real challenge to deal with later on. The lithium battery focus needs to change. I mean, I know there's a lot of people in the industry paying a lot of attention to this, but I don't think necessarily the right focus in all the right areas. We need to actually sit down together and solve for this challenge. The challenge is, in our opinion, looking at the data, looking at the risk, the challenge is with people who are purposely not doing this, who are hiding these things, and that means we need governments to step up and do their job and prosecute. But we need as an industry also to tackle some of these other areas, right? Which may not have a huge impact on the overall risk, but they do allow us to mitigate them overall. So safe supply chains and how we connect them together. And lastly, I'm just going to go one step further on the sustainability. So Glyn talked about, you know, the sustainability survey that we do, that they do, and then Fabio talked about, you know, how this is really the word. You must be looking at this. I think industry sustainability has got to be the moving forwards theme, and I really think that we need to do a conscious effort on connecting these various strategies, because I mean, having one strategy is great. I think most people are getting there, varying degrees in the maturity of them, but connecting them up actually can be a real challenge, and getting pressure from one party to be more sustainable while you're in turn attempting to pressure your other partner is not necessarily conducive to being a more sustainable industry as a whole. So there are probably aspects of that sustainability strategy that we can begin to connect that then can have effects where those parties begin to connect them themselves as businesses.
Yep. Okay. Good. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for your pearls of wisdom and your insights and your time and your support. It's really appreciated. And please God, touch wood and everything else, we'll be able to see each other in Rome or somewhere soon. And looking forward to it.
Been a pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.